There was another, and there
I
was,
apologize for that. I didn't start recording at the beginning. My bad, everyone.
okay. And, and Proceedings of the American Association of Bovine Practitioners. So we actually did three journals. There's the magazine, which is the practitioner, the proceedings of the annual, and then there's a proceedings of student conference also on the site. So prior to this project, these publications were such closed access that there was only two ways you could get to them. Either you were a member of the association and they were sending it to you, or again, you were a library like us that we had a subscription. So the resulting digital version, they wanted it to be open access, and they also wanted it to be discoverable by search engines like Google Scholar and OA discovery tools such as Unpaywall. Now, what's new about this project, I mean, we've all seen all kinds of electronic serials on the OJS platform. Next slide, please. What's new about this project is we're not publishing a current journal. DSpace and other repository software, they don't really support serial publications. I mean, again, we have some serial publications in our repository. It's possible to load individual serial issues as single items, but then you have to find workarounds to try to collate the issues and get the display to represent that what you have is a single ongoing publication. OJS was developed to facilitate the publication of a current digital serial. And it's really a tool to manage the article submission and review workflow and manage files, the publication workflow, and proofreading and other kinds of things. What we've done differently is use OJS as a platform to support a legacy serial. So you can run an instance of OJS at your institution, but in our case, we're using the OJS instance provided by the Texas Digital Library. So it's free. Again, it's easy to use. We found that we can train, I mean, we've trained the whole cataloging department using this serial. We've pretty much trained quite a few people in the cataloging department to ingest article metadata and PDF files. You can use it right out of the box, or you can customize. There's all kinds of fun plugin tools, and there's strong community support. So again, this is the URL for the OJS site. But again, we also got a lot of help from our friends at the Texas Digital Library, and we want to give a shout out to Nick. Next slide, please. So this is what you have to consider when you start thinking about how you're going to plan your project. At the journal issue, you're going to have to think about your journal policies and your copyright. I mean, again, do you even have the copyright to digitize this serial? Excuse me. At the issue level, you're gonna have to consider how to scan issues, how to deposit the files so that people working on the project can share them, how to set up issues. And at the article level, you're going to have to worry about your PDFs, how to get the metadata ingested into the system. You're going to have to think about planning your DOIs and your user interface and design. And we'd like to touch on all of these themes during this workshop and give you a taste how much it's so much fun to use OJS. And of course, being the ag school, maybe we just like the journal too. Slide. It was fun to work with these cows. So I'm going to pass you off to Claire here. Claire, you're muted.
Claire, are you there? Sorry, I was away. All right, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide, Eric. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the journal settings for the site. So first off, we're going to talk about the journal settings. You can configure the journal, the website, the workflow, and the distribution settings. All right. And, oh, can you go back? Previously, yeah. So in the journal settings, you will upload the name of the journal and the ISSN number and the contact information for your editor and your editing team. And this is also where you will set up the issues sections. And so sorry, computers freaking out. Okay. All right. All right, so the masthead section is where you're going to put the publisher, the ISSN, and then a journal summary. So the journal summary is very important because that's what's going to display if you are using a search engine and looking for your journal. So you don't want to neglect that. And then the website settings are where you get to do the majority of your site customization work. This section doesn't have anything that's required by OJS. You don't have to mess with anything in this, but these menus allow you to customize and enhance your site. So it's important to be familiar with all of the tabs. So there's an appearance tab, and that's where you will choose your site's theme. And we're going to talk about this more towards the end of the presentation, but just keep that in the back of your mind. If your journal has multiple languages, you can set this up under the Languages tab. This will allow you to enter text in multiple languages, but it's not going to automatically translate things for you. It's just going to provide multiple text boxes. So if you have your journal is simultaneously in French and English, you can input your French metadata at the same time you're loading your English metadata. And then there's the plugin section, and that's where you can enhance user navigation, display information in an engaging way, and add all sorts of tools from metadata formatting, indexing, payment options, and theming. Now, the navigation menus are the skeleton of your site. This is where you're going to add pages to your site, organize the menus, and change the name of those items in the HTML code of the site. Again, I'll talk more about this later. You'll want to be very, very careful when you make changes on this tab because you're actually going in and altering the structure of this site. So the workflow settings are set up with current publications in mind. So since we were working on legacy journals, we only use the article components tab. And this is where you set up what sort of galleys, which is their term for objects that you'll attach to your articles. So that's where you would put article texts or data sets or an image or research results. And I'll go over in the next slide the way you can use the workflow settings for current journal. And the distribution settings allow you to determine how your article will be indexed by search engines and how it will be described in search results. It gives you a sitemap, and this is where you'll set up who can access the journal, add security measures, and set up payment options, and tweak the copyright information so it's correct. All right, next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned in the previous slide, the workflow settings tab has a wealth of settings that weren't really useful for us with a legacy project, but will be indispensable for a journal that would use OJS as its primary publishing platform. So the workflow settings are where you will set up the options for submissions and the review process as a whole. So the submission tab is where you would customize a guideline message for your authors. So that's everything from formatting to citation guidelines, Basically, any standards that your journal has for authors, you would put it in there. You can create a submission checklist, and you can even set up, which is very handy, a way for authors to add their own metadata at the time that they're submitting an article. The review tab is pretty self-explanatory. It's where you set up the default review period and basically format all of your settings for your reviewers. So that means that you can send automatic email reminders through your site. You can add review forms and set up a competing interest statement and create guidelines. And this is also where you will toggle between different review options: blind, double blind, and open, and set up your reviewers' access to the actual article text. So as you can see, we didn't really use this very much, but OJS has a very powerful native way for you to basically be in command of the entire review process in a very simple and easy to program way. For a more in-depth discussion of these settings from people who actually have used most of them, the PKP school that's offered by OJS has several courses that will teach you the ins and outs of setting up an editorial workflow in OJS. And even if you're not planning on having an editorial workflow, it's super, super fun to use because they give you a personal sandbox page. So you can test out theme, you can see how your journal will look, and all with a moderator from PKP. So we highly recommend it. It's what we used when we just got started. All right, next slide. Okay, it's back to you, Lisa.
And again, muted.
Sorry about that. One starts to talk and nothing comes out. We can navigate later and show you how we did these when we pull the pull the OJS itself up, but you can see that you've got sidebar options here where you can put tags, or you can put images, or you can put tools. But we'll get to that, look at that later. Next slide.
Oh, I guess this is my section. Things switched around a little bit. All right, so managing PDF. So we talked about after we kind of got the initial things set up for the article, or we're going to go back into the depth a little bit more about that. But for managing the PDFs, which are kind of the large focus of, besides the metadata, is the actual PDFs of the journals. So I'm going to talk about some things that we had to do for that. So the first is getting the files ready for the correct level of the repository. Are we doing the metadata for the entire journal, or is it based on the smaller article level? We'll talk about applying copyright or collection statements to the pieces, and then as well as a little bit of PDF security. So with the PDFs, so as I was saying, you have the issue level. If you have the issue level PDF, so 300 pages or whatever, this is just like a copy of what the journal would be. You have to go through and extract those and make them into smaller little chunks to get to the article levels for them. So that was kind of our use case here. Was we were given a large PDF, one large PDF for it all, and then we had to go through and extract the pages based on the sections, because we were doing ours at the article level. If you had the reverse case of that, if you had article level PDFs, so a bunch of small ones, and you needed to combine them together, which we had a few cases where we needed to do that, or fixing things, we were using merge. So we had found two different programs that were able to do this. The first one that we ended up using the most was a program called PDF SAM Basic. They had some premium ones that you could pay for, but the basic fit our needs for it. There's the link for it up there. Like I said, it met our needs for doing that extraction or the merging of the files. There was no licensing fee. It was free. It was open source. And it was easy to install. So when we all got sent home for lockdown kind of thing, AWL, it was easy for us to install on our personal computers, or if we had to do some quick things like at work, it was a pretty easy process to go through. They had some options for like portable or zip one, so it was just install, here you go. You could also use Adobe Acrobat Pro. It worked for it, but it wasn't as convenient for us. So we ended up going with the PDF SAM. So this is some tips about PDF SAM. One of the big things that kind of tripped us up when we were teaching new cataloger staff, as Lisa had mentioned that we'd had quite a few people kind of going during this when we were doing the lockdown stuff. But the important thing too is remember the splitting of the PDFs was based on the PDF page, which is up across the top, versus the PDF number at the bottom on the actual piece is the numbering. So the numbering was the thing we'd got kind of tripped up on, because if you're splitting the PDFs, you need to know the PDF number. If you're doing the metadata, you need to look at the bottom for the page number that's listed on there. So this is a close-up of PDF SAM. So on the extract settings, you're able to quickly and easily kind of specify the pages that you want. So you can do a range like 1 to 10 or 1 to 11, and then you could do a space for having a gap, and then just do like pages 25 to 26. So it's really easy for us to just extract the pages that we need. And then they also had a nice kind of naming convention for naming the files. You drop them into the program. You're able to then add prefixes, so it would keep the base name of the file. So like if it was volume 1, if that was the first PDF volume for it, it would be like that. We'd have that as the base name. Then we were doing a number ordering. So this was the first article, so it was the name of the files, then order number 001, and then we'd had a few words from like the title page, just so it was easy to look at the files when we had them. We were able to see they were in the correct order. It had the title of the piece next to it, so as we were going through the upload process, we were able to making sure we had the right one when we brought it in, matched it up with the PDF or with the metadata for it. For some further documentation, you can refer to PDF SAM for these two different ones for the merging and the extraction process. They were super helpful in getting kind of referring people to it, and it was pretty straightforward, but more information there if you need it. For applying the copyright statement, sometimes we had received PDFs that were at different stages of where they were at. So sometimes you need to have that copyright statement on it, either for legal purposes or just saying that, hey, this is part of it, or this is the version that's there. We had to do that. So there was a few, what we had used was Adobe Acrobat Pro DC. So this is that paid one. We're using the tool Watermark, which lets you specify the text that you wanted, as well as it also has an option to be able to be done in batch. So you could apply it to a set of PDFs or just a single one if you wanted to do that. So we've kind of had the both cases for that. Again, documentation's there for more help. So this is what the watermarking kind of looks like. So you can specify a text or an image. So you could put whatever your statement was up there. You can change the size of it, the fonts, the everything else. You can change where it's being displayed on the page if you want it across the bottom, or like this one's across the side. And so then you're able to save that and apply it to all of the pages that you needed it to, or if you wanted to change it on that. And then additionally, if you need some extra security or something like that on your PDFs, if you didn't want people being able to easily download a copy, make slight changes, something like that, and upload it, you could also go through and add some additional security with it. So with Adobe Acrobat Pro DC, you're able to also change the permissions so you could limit, you would have to put in a password for things like viewing, printing, editing, or copying, like highlighting the text and copying from the PDF. So you could kind of determine which level you wanted to unlock and which level you didn't, or you were letting people use. Again, more documentation there if you need it. All right, back to you, Lisa.
Okay, being the cataloger, of course, I want to talk about the metadata. And I mean, I want to talk about the metadata fields that you have available to you, again, before we show you the system. So there's issue level metadata, article level metadata, and production metadata. Slide. And okay, we were making a joke because there's an article about lying goat behavior, which we thought was funny, and helpful mice. So what we're saying is, well, I'm going to talk about some tips that we're going to give you that seem to be about niggly little things, But we found out through experience that these little things matter, and you should pre-plan for them, because in the long term, the little things that we didn't know generated a lot of frustration, and we lost time when we had to go back and correct the metadata for each article because of some little thing that we missed. And again, we had over 1,600 articles. So to find out that after the fact that we should have done something with the metadata was really frustrating to go back and fix it. So that's like, we'd like to tell you where we messed up so that you don't mess up. Slide. Okay, so before you're able to upload or input an article, metadata, or article PDF files, you've got to set up a destination issue where you want your articles to go. So what you're going to do when you open OJS, and again, right now I'm showing you in slides, but we'll show you later on OJS, you go to the menu here to the side and click issues, and then future issue or back issue, or it'll be across the top here. And what you do is you say, create a new issue. Go ahead, slide please. So I've got issue level metadata. And what I get is identification where I've got volume, number, and year, or I've got a title field, and I've got an issue description field. So let's take next slide. Let's do some serials cataloging here. Serials have what we call enumeration and chronology. So in this first example, the Death Valley telescope, I've got enumeration and chronology. So enumeration, it's a series of numbering, and each one has to, it's a combination of numbers, letters, dates, or words that identifies an issue with a numeric sequence, and it usually unique to, it has to be unique to every issue, although of course publishers miscount sometimes. And chronology is a date or combination of dates that identifies the issue of the serial with the chronological designation. And again, they're supposed to be unique. So some serials have enumeration, like this first one. Some of them only have chronology, like the one on the bottom. And in fact, this was our serial. And it only has January 1967. It doesn't have numbering when it started out. And there's some things, unnumbered series have neither enumeration or chronology. What, I mean, you know what a series is? You have a sequence of monographs that all have the same series title, in addition to each piece has an individual monographic title for that piece. But it's still, you have to be able to uniquely identify the issue. And the other thing is, both enumeration and chronology can be either in a single level or multiple levels. Next slide. So what I mean by that, if you see the first example here, this is multiple levels. I've got number 6, part 3. In other words, I've got numbers that are divided into parts. That's a 2-level enumeration. And it also has, this example also has a corresponding chronology where I've got years and months. So usually if something's more than annual, it's going to have a 2-level chronology, because remember, we said, although publishers don't always follow it, chronology has to uniquely identify each issue. So our problem is sometimes they'll just put 1960 and they'll publish 3 issues a year and they'll only give you a year, like 1960. Well, in theory, they can't do that because that wouldn't be unique on every issue. So the part, like the name of the unit is called the caption. And let's see, can you back up 1 slide, please, Eric? Or 2 slides, sorry. Yeah, okay. Here's a problem. Here's a goat, as we call it. OJS only gives you the choice of volume and number. In other words, I can have volumes divided by numbers. Yeah, I'm waving my mouse around and no one can see it, right? So maybe Eric can point for me. You can have volumes divided by numbers, or you could have just plain volumes and not fill in the number, or you could have just plain numbers. But the problem is that's all you get. So legacy serials, okay, if you're publishing a current serial using OJS, you've noticed on current serials, they're all volume number, volume number, volume number. And this is why, because OJS, they're giving you the caption volume and giving you the caption number, and you fill in a digit there, and you don't have any choices. The problem is a legacy serial could have other captions like part or number, and including in other language, it could be volumen or heft or something else. So the other problem is OJS doesn't accommodate the case where, what do I do when the publisher changes numbering, changes the numbering system, or restarts the numbering? So how would I enter a serial where I have volume 1, number 1, and let's say it goes to volume 10, number 12, and then it backs up, and again, we're talking about a legacy serial, it backs up and says new series, volume 1. I have no way to get that new series in here because the box will just take a digit, and volume's all I get. And the other problem with OJS, for chronology, I just get the year here. So, and it'll only take digits. You can't put in here 1960 May because it won't take the May, it'll just take a 4-digit year. So what do I do if I've got a chronology on my piece, and you saw that first piece we had, the only numbering on that piece was 1967 January. Well, I can't say 1967 January, okay, back again, because I can't get it in here. I mean, I can't number this piece. Sorry.
Back up the current.
Okay, so this is part of the problem. Okay, I'm going to start explaining to you the problem that OJS provides a lot of useful features, but there's still these little niggling roadblocks that you have to tweak. And this is because it was developed as a platform to publish a current serial. So again, this restriction on possible numbering is a problem. And you can't just convert the designation on the original issues. Let's say I have issues that are numbered, has numbers divided by parts. Well, I can't just say, okay, fine, OJS has volumes divided by numbers. So I'm just going to set the legacy the legacy journal up that way, because you have students and you have disciplinary citation databases that are using the numbering as is found on the issue. So you can't, I've seen people do it, but it's really not a good idea just to use the volume divided by numbers that OJS gives you, because you're changing the numbering on the piece, and you're not referring to it in the same way that it's actually cited. So, okay. see here. Could you back, well, no, forward one. Okay, so you only get volume, number, and year. Here's the other thing. When you look down underneath there at the little check boxes, what it's also doing is the check boxes are what displays out front. So, okay, we pulled a tweak, and what we did, we used this title field to take care of all these problems with the numbering, although that's not what it's for. The title field is really for when you have individual titles or theme titles on separate issues of the serial. But we had to finesse it because this, again, I can't get, this is the January 1967 issue, and I can't get it in this identification box because there's no way to get the January in there. So what we did is uncheck the volume, the number, and the year for display, kept the title checked, and wrote out in the title field the way we wanted the numbering for this older serial. I don't know if there's questions in the chat. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's annoying, but it's pretty simple. And
That looks clear.
yeah, in our case, this bovine practitioner gave us a good workout because not only was the earlier issues were spring and summer, but they had inconsistent numbering until 1999. So the earlier issues were just a year with a month. And then all of a sudden it turned around and said a year divided by a season. And then about the fifth issue, it decided it was going to number whole numbers like number 7 to number 31.2. And then later, with volume 34, it went to the regular numbering of volume 34, number 2, spring 2019. So there was no way to fix this given the fields we have. So you're almost forced to use that title field to input the designations for legacy serials. Next slide. Here's other cases. I mean, it's the whole numbering one where I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's one I could actually get into OJS if I had that example. I would check the number, turn off the volume, turn off the year, and turn off the title, and then just use the numbering. But almost everything else, you're going to end up using the title field. So I've got a whole number here, but I've got a chronology with 2 levels that I can't get in there unless I use the title field. And then you've got these weird cases where the year is the volume number divided by internal numbers. Again, OJS isn't going to accommodate that. And for an unnumbered series, of course, you use the title field. So I almost want to say everything that you're going to digitize is most likely going to be more than once a year. And that second level chronology is going to force you to put the numbering in the title field just because there's no other way to get it to set up so that the numbering on your digitized issues matches what was really on the issue. And it seems really like a pesky, annoying little thing, but it's one of those things that you need to know about OJS. And okay, click next, please. Okay, the reason this matters also, in this case, this is a later issue of the bovine. It's volume 51, number 2. I can get the 51 and the 2. What I can't get is the summer because I only get the year. So again, the only thing I have checked for display is the title. And I'm going to display this 51, number 2, 2017 summer on the issue landing page and on the articles. But I also filled in the volume number and year. Why would I do that? Go ahead and click, please. because later, as you'll see, you're going to do a DOI. If you want to do a DOI assignment where you're asking OJS to please calculate the DOIs for you, and you're going to say, I'm going to give you a pattern. Well, if you give it a pattern where you say the numbering is Texas A&M's ID, and then we're saying, I'm going to give you a pattern for the DOIs where I want you to say bovine, and then go get the volume numbering plus the issue numbering plus the page numbering, and calculate that out and automatically assign DOIs to me for all my articles, and then send them off for registration. I've got to have these fields filled out in the volume and the numbering, even though I'm not using them for display. Okay, go ahead and click, please. Here's the same problem. I've got this 1969 number 4, or I'm sorry, wow, that looks terrible. Because what it really is, the true issue is number 4 that was issued in 1969 October. So for display, I turned all this off, but I use 69 and 4 in the numbering. Go ahead and click. Because another tool that's on your public interface is this citation creator. And there, again, the citation tool counts on this volume and numbering to be filled out when it figures out the citation. So you have to keep that in mind when you're filling out this numbering, what these other tools are going to do. So this doesn't really look right because it's number 4 for 1969, but this is the best we could get it. And again, it took bovine and then this 1969 in here, I mean, volume 1969, number 4, this isn't exactly right, but it's the only way we could get these tools to work out is by filling in this volume and number, even though they aren't right in column 69, the volume divided into numbers. So you have to consider this kind of thing before you start entering the metadata. Next slide, please. Oh, here it is. This is the pattern for the DOI. It's the volume and the number, and then the page, whatever the page numbering is, and it'll automatically go get it. But for that to happen, there has to be something here in these fields. Okay, so the description field, and again, I'm still talking about issue metadata. This would be a description of the issue. And if you had it, it would appear here under the issue numbering. And you can see how the issue numbering is displaying off that title field, by the way. And then you can drag and drop a cover image in here in the issue metadata, and it'll display both on the archive, like the index for the journal with the issue listing, and it'll display on the issue landing page, and the if you want, the cover image will also display on the article landing pages. Next. Okay, then there's an issue publication data, but hold that thought because that's also tricky, and we'll get to that in a minute. Next. So article level data, you've got journal section, and the journal section is the organization of materials into categories by type of material or subject matter. So there was like dairy session, and then articles, and then beef session, and then articles. Next slide. So the first thing you have to do is go to settings, go to this journal, next slide, or I'm sorry, next click. There we go. Whoops, no, click, yeah, it should pop, okay, yeah. Go to this section, and you can create sections if you need to. If you don't need them, that's fine. So you click on this create section, and you can see this is for the proceedings. We have this was actually for the Bovine Journal. We created these different sections. Go ahead and click. And when you say create a section, then you're going to have section metadata. So there's a section title, an abbreviation. And for legacy journals, we don't care about most of that. I mean, there's who's the section editor and how many words is something allowed to have and yada, 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 yada. What you really care about is the section title, which is going to display in your issue table of contents, but also you care about checking these things off. So you need to say that the articles in this section will not be peer reviewed, because this is a legacy serial. And if you added an article and you don't have this checked off, it's going to try to demand that you send an article for peer review. And then you can decide whether the articles in this section require abstracts or not. And you do want to include it in the indexing. And you don't want it to be the case that only editors and section editors can submit articles. And you do want the section title and the issue table of contents. And you do want the author names. So even though it's a legacy journal, you need to click these things off, or when you try to submit articles, it's going to give you problems if you don't have this stuff set up. Next slide, please. Okay, the article level metadata. I'm going from issue metadata to article level metadata. So, can you move up one? I feel like I'm missing. There we go. Okay. So when I start to add my articles, and these are the metadata fields that you get. The first thing, you're going to load an article and you say, okay, I want to do metadata for this article. The first thing it's going to ask you is whether this article is going to belong to one of the sections. And what you do is you click here and you're going to get a list of the sections that a controlled list of the sections that you've already set up in the issue level metadata. And I mean, in this case, this article goes in the article section. Wait, next slide. No, back up, sorry.
This one?
Yeah, this is what you get. You get a prefix. This is the non-filing characters. In other words, words like a and, the, los, las, that you don't want in the title indexing. It does display on the issue table of content. The article will display on the landing page and on the citation. It just, hopefully it won't display on the title index, but right now we don't have a title index for the Bovine, so I can't tell you, but I think it won't. And in fact, when you do a keyword search or a search on the journal site, the resulting article title display doesn't display the initial article prefix. So you do want the title itself, you do want to capitalize the first word of the rest of the title, or it's going to look funny in search results that it's going to show up in lowercase. I mean, again, this is a pesky thing, but it makes your journal look better. And let me note here what was really odd about the keyword search in the journal site search looking for articles is it doesn't put them in alphabetical order, which is surprising. Okay, you have to have a title, that's required. You don't have to have a subtitle, not required. You don't have to have an abstract, not required. So for new issues, we were lucky and there were abstracts on the articles. For older issues, we would eyeball the introduction or look at the end paragraph or look for something that seemed to summarize the article, and then we'd copy and paste the information. Excuse me. However, we found it's better to paste into Word and check the text, because when you try to copy and paste from the article PDF itself, sometimes you'll get weird spacing, especially on the PDFs of the older articles. And you'll get weird characters because it's not recognizing special characters. So it's better to fix that in Word and then paste it here in the abstract box. I mean, you've got tools here. I mean, you can change the font, you can use bullets, you can put in a link, you can put in a picture, but it really is hard to correct text in this abstract box. So you're better off fixing it somewhere else and then pasting it in. Next slide. So here's an example of an article.
Yep, sorry.
That's right. Here's an example where it had an article, it had an initial article, a title, and a subtitle, and this is what it looks like. And it always looks like this. I mean, it always, instead of the colon and then the subtitle, on all places where this appears, like the article landing page or the issue table of contents, it always puts the subtitle down in smaller font on the next line. So you need to make sure you capitalize that subtitle too, because it's not going to come after a colon the way we would see it in a catalog record. Okay, next. Okay, here's another one that's kind of tricky. This is what the authors look like. You can see here what the authors look like in the public display. And again, we're in the metadata box where you're adding authors. So you have to click here and add a contributor to do another one. And
Oops.
this is what, well, I was going to say, you have your contributors. You can edit one that you already have. You can delete one. Don't touch, yeah, be careful you don't get confused by this. This is adding the person as a user to some function in OJS. If you want to add another author, use the add contributor up in the corner. So you click add contributor and what you get is on the next slide. Oh, I need to talk faster. So you've got a given name, a family name, and this is really odd because the given name is required, but the family name isn't. Okay, how do you prefer to be addressed? Well, we're talking about legacy serial, so we didn't care about this. One problem we did have is this email is required. We're talking about people that have been dead for 20 years. I mean, we don't have an email. And we don't know the email anyway. So what we ended up doing, put a fake email in if you have to. I mean, just anything like library@tamden.edu or give it, make it happy, give it an email. It's not going to display anywhere. The reason they're asking for this is, again, the system thinks you're doing a current journal and that you need to be contacting these authors back and forth. It's also asking for a country. We just, I mean, again, it's a legacy serial. This doesn't make sense. So we just put USA and everything. And of course, for legacy serial, again, we're talking 1967. These authors don't have orchid IDs either, but that's not required. Next slide. You've got affiliation, which isn't required. However, it's useful and we used it and we knew what it was because it was on the pieces. And the other thing it's going to force you to do is this contributor's role. So someone's either an author or a translator. That's obvious. I mean, they're all just by default, they're authors. Keep going. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, well. Yeah, back up one a little bit. I mean, this is kind of silly. We shouldn't have said principal contact for editorial correspondence because, of course, it's a legacy serial. These people don't, we're not writing to them. But you do want to include the author in the browse list. So make sure you check that one off. Okay, next. Here's some of this niggly little goaty stuff. Originally, the version we had of OJS, it had a middle name. And of course, we had people that had middle names. But when you think about it, all the authority control systems or entity management systems that identify people usually don't have a middle name field. So we were afraid that if we put people's middle names in here, then if we ever tried to match this metadata up against a, let's say a name authority file, that doesn't have middle names, it wasn't going to match. Or better said, those other systems don't have middle names as a granular field in and of itself. So your other problem was the last name, the name character count could be small. So you ask the system administrator to give you more characters. Here's a second or a third problem. Right now, OJS doesn't understand diacritics very well. So it thinks that Renee with a diacritic and Renee without, it thinks that's two different people. It's not like a catalog system where you put it in correctly with the diacritics, but if the user types the search without the diacritics, you'll still get the hit. OJS won't give you a hit, so it matters. We put the diacritics in, although it made me a little nervous because I don't think users are going to think to type that in that way, but we're betting on the future that it'll be fixed, that it'll normalize the diacritics in the search. Click, please. So here's the fun part. The new version of OJS now doesn't have the middle name. It just has a given name and a family name. So I'm glad we didn't use that middle name when we transferred our data to the new version of OJS. I'm glad we didn't use that middle name field. Next. Here's a problem. OJS didn't recognize a corporate body or a conference name as an author. So we're kind of stuck because we had articles that were by the American Association of Bovine Practitioners. And it was demanding I put a first or a last. So the only thing we could think of to do was say Bovine Practitioners American Association of, and it's going to display like this because in the front end display for the authors for on the article landing page and on the journal table of contents, it does first name, last name. So it displayed straight out like this. But if we ever indexed this thing, it would be Bovine Practitioners, comma, which isn't fun, but it was the only way at the time we could get it to work. Next click. Next. Okay, so now I'm not going to have, oh, sorry. Well, okay, now I wouldn't have that problem because remember, the new version is saying I only need a first name, I don't have a middle name, and I don't need a last name. So now you could put the corporate body just in the first name field and put the whole thing there without having to split it up like we did. Although I am curious why the first name was chosen to be the required one and not the last name. So you put the corporate body in the first name, and I'm trying to think how that's going to work in an index. We'll have to see. The other issue, there's no authority control. I mean, there's no recognition of variant names. So you're doing 1,600 articles and we weren't checking and we didn't make a database of authors. So on some articles, it could appear one way. On another article, it could appear a different way. And we weren't catching that it was the same person. And the system's not going to recognize it. It's the same person either. Keep going. Quick, please. And the reason that matters is you've got a tool called More by the Same Author, where you're on an article landing page and it recognizes who the authors are, and it goes and fetches more stuff by those same authors. Well, if you don't have some kind of authorized form of the author names, your matching is not going to be very good. So you might want to consider if you want to have people declare what their preferred name is and then use that the same all the time. Next screen. Okay, author data. Well, again, we just made up this fake email and we just said everyone's United States. Oh, that wasn't true. Some people were from France, but whatever. Keep going. Author affiliation not required, but useful. But again, there's another tool that says something like, show me all the articles put out by North Carolina State University, Department of Animal Science. If you don't have an authorized form in there, it's not going to match. I mean, you're not going to get all the articles. It's not going to collate. Next screen. I got a little faster on the metadata. Keywords not required, although we did use some. So you got to be careful when you're entering these keywords here. Do one and pound on it really hard on your return key. Make sure you get this square box with an X. They have to be separate. Every keyword or keyword phrase, you have to make sure they're separate, because we made that mistake. So I'm telling you not to make it, because otherwise this cloud won't work here. And your keywords aren't searchable. Well, I mean, it'll just be one big mess or one big string. Next. Okay, then you've got publication data, and it's kind of tricky because, okay, if you look at the top, the metadata, the other metadata fields we were looking at would have been entered in this metadata field. But then there's this other set of metadata called publication metadata, and you've got to know to click down here on the schedule for publication box. Next slide, please. So for this article, I've got to tell it, and I've got to match the way I called the article when I set up the issue the way I named the issue when I set up the issue metadata. So I'm saying this article goes to this issue. You can give it the pages here, it's optional. However, remember, if you're going to use paging in the DOI pattern, this is where it gets it from. So the first time around, we didn't have the page numbers in here. We couldn't set up the DOI pattern, and we had to go back in article by article, put the pages in. Okay, next. Here's a real, oops. Can you back up one click? Here's a real goat. Since it's publishing things, it's set up to publish current journals. It's always demanding this year, month, day format, because it considers an article be published the day you submit the article and then click on publish to the journal, and it goes right down to that day. Well, for legacy series, you might have a month, but you sure don't have a day. That doesn't happen. So what we did is we used the chronology and just assumed that was the same as the publication date. Because usually, publication, we would have just said 1982. Okay, next. And here's the other horrible little thing. You can't just type this date in here and expect it to take. You've got to click on this box, go find the calendar, find the day on the calendar and really click hard on that calendar and make it, force it in there so that it nails it in there. Because if you just type in the date, when you publish the issue, it'll override. I mean, you know, I'm doing a legacy serial. I could have an old date in here that's something like 1980, June 1st. If you just write that date in there, when you publish the issue to the front end, it'll assume that the day that you publish the issue, that is, you move it out for public display, it'll assume that's the publication date, and it'll overlay whatever you typed in here. So the only way to get, and I mean, we did this a couple of times, we kept fixing these dates, and then it would be, you look at the front end and it would be the current day's dates, and like, what? You have to know that you've got to click on here, get the calendar, click on the date on the calendar to really nail this date in here so it doesn't get overridden. Next slide. And here's another, keep in mind, in the public search on your articles, it's got a date filter, but it's going to insist on this. I put 2013 in here, but if you don't fill these in, it'll just automatically put January 1st or whatever year you put in here. I mean, it does that whether you like it or not. So keep that in mind when you're setting up your issue dates. Next. Okay, here's some odds and ends here. If I'm on this back issues, once you've published an issue, you can edit that issue. I have to catch up on my slides here. Wow. Okay, I'll just wing it. You can view the issue. If you click on view, it's going to open the public side in a new tab. If you say delete this issue, it's going to really go away and you can't get it back. So you need to be really careful. That 10 here tells me there's 10 articles in this issue. If I say publish, okay, for an issue that hasn't been published yet, that's the future ones. It'll say publish here. If you click on publish, it'll send it to the front end and then it'll push it to the back issue tab. The thing is, what if I made a mistake, and we did, where it's like, oops, I got to go in and get an article out of here, or I've got to add an article. I say edit here, but to edit or add a new article, I need to unpublish the issue. To do that, add the article, make the changes I'm going to do, and then republish the issue. So there's one thing you need to know. For all these lists like this in OJS, this 54 number 2 it's at the top here. It's the last one we did. But if I edit this, oh, never mind, bad example. If I edit this one, 53 number 2, it's going to assume if I edit this and then I save that, it's going to assume that that's the current issue. Go to the next slide and see if I can explain this better. Okay, all of this ordering always works the same. When I have multiple authors, and you see it here, or when I have multiple sections, and at the issue table of contents, and for a list of issues, the latest thing that you fixed will get stuck down at the bottom. It has the last one. So right now I have on my piece, the articles are in this order. If I take this second author and I edit something, if I click beside her name and I open the menu and I edit a misspelling in her last name or something like that, and then I save that, it's going to drop her down to the bottom. Like the last thing you touch always gets dropped down to the bottom. So how do I fix it? All of these lists have this order button. If I click the order button, I get my list, and then I get these arrows. I can either move something up and down, or I can grab it and I can move it back into position. So this is something you have to remember. If you change an author and you want to move it back up into position, you've got to click author and then drag it back in. And the same thing goes, for example, for the article list within an issue. Okay, can you go up one more slide, or back up one slide? Yeah, it was the same problem here. If I edit an earlier issue, it's going to assume that that's the latest issue and move it back to the top. It's going to yank it out of order. So I've got to click this order button here and move my issue back into place. I hope that's clear. Yeah, keep going. Okay. Yeah, I mean, keep an eye on the order of things. Before we take a 5-minute break, are there questions in the chat?
I currently do not see any chat or Q&A in either the Zoom platform or the Whova platform. So just a reminder, if you do have questions, feel free to put those in there. I think we are going to keep it to about a 5-minute break if possible. So I'm going to pause the recording, Zoom recording, and I'm going to hand it back off to our wonderful speakers. This is a very informative, in-depth look at OJS3. So take it away, Lisa, Eric, and Claire.
Okay, so once you understand what the metadata fields are, there's 3 ways to get the metadata in. The standard way where you click submissions here, and then you're going to get a new the new submission over here, and you click on that. So go ahead and click. I should have a screenshot here. Yeah. So it'll walk you through it. So start up, section articles must be submitted to one of the sections. And then it goes into all these requirements, yada, yada. And then upload the submission. And then you'll get the metadata boxes where you enter the metadata, the confirmation, next step. That's the normal way that one would be doing it if you were publishing a new journal. Click, please. The problem with doing that is it's a real goat, because since it thinks you're trying to publish a new journal, it starts asking you questions about, well, okay, are you going to assign an editor to this? And who are you going to send it to review? And by the way, where's the proofreader? Did you assign a proofreader? And what's this author? What's their copyright? And yada, 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 yada. And then these email tasks start hounding you. Like, there's no editor to this. I mean, assign an editor. And, this author, you need to contact them. I mean, it's horrible. And everybody that's working on the site ends up getting an email about all this stuff too. So you can do it the regular way, but then you've got this mess here, and you've got to delete these things one by one. You can't delete them in batch. So it's pretty horrible. I wouldn't recommend this. Next. The second way you can get the metadata in, okay, we thought we were going to be clever, and we went to Cabby and we talked to them, and they had metadata for a lot of these articles, not all of them, and sometimes some issues were missing, or metadata for some articles in the issues were missing. But it is possible to bulk load the metadata and the files, and it kind of works like repository software does. I mean, from Cabby, we were able to, okay, I can pull up the issues of this journal just by asking it for an ISSN search assigned to that journal. So, and then I told it, export that, and it'll export it to a spreadsheet. But then the problem is, to upload it in bulk in OJS, I've got to get it into this OJS XML format, which you'll find here on GitHub. Next slide. This is just to give you a taste of what this metadata, what the export from Cabby looked like. Mine is. It's kind of awful because for some of these, there could have been, I'm showing you a snippet so you can start to see the problems. For example, OJS requires the publication date to be in that year, month, day, and you can see the metadata from Cabby on column D just came in by year. And then I needed the pages, and some of the Cabby abstracts had it. I mean, I could get the pages, but then the spreadsheet started going haywire thinking it was a date sometimes. And then the problem gets to be, for every single author in Cabby, there was a first name, a last name, and an email, and then a first name, a last name, and maybe an email. Okay, so you multiply that. There were things that had up to 10 authors. So you just added 30 more columns to this, where you've got to say author 1, first name, author 2, or author 1, last name, author 1, email, author 2, first name, yada, 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 yada. And then OJS is going to require a country and an email for an author, but these older people didn't have it. So for each of these authors, you had to make it up and put it in here in this spreadsheet. So, yeah. Okay, we did a substantial number of issues in this manner. If you go to the next slide, and then you had to put the keywords all came in the same column, and then you had to separate them out into separate columns, because remember, OJS wants them separately. So you got to get that spreadsheet, then you got to transform it, and this is again a snippet of the XML. So we had to get a developer. I mean, by the time we were done, we had more than 75 columns in that spreadsheet that you had to clean up. And that's for each issue. You had a spreadsheet for every single issue. And then you had to get a developer to write you a script that would take every one of the 75 columns and push it somewhere in this spreadsheet. And then plus you had to clean up the spreadsheets because the data was dirty. So for every issue, it was costing us like half a day just to fix and clean up the spreadsheet and get the XML format. So I wouldn't recommend, frankly, I wouldn't recommend you doing this. We're making fun of our title here, but this was a real goat. Next slide, please. There's a third way to get the metadata in. It's the metadata creation ingest quick submit plugin. So if you go to the tools, okay, here's the thing. We were going to show you a demo, which we have recorded, but we don't think there's time. So what we're going to do is park the recording with the workshop materials so that you can watch it on your own. So OJS has a built-in tool for entering metadata and adding the PDF file. You have to do this one by one, but you get real quick at it. You go to the tools, import, export menu, and you'll see the quick submit tool and open it up. You have to do it one by one, but as you can see, this is a user-friendly interface, and it's got the metadata fields that OJS uses. So you can get students or staff to do this because it's filling the box. It's easy, no programming, no scripting. If your articles, if you've got the PDF article, what we were doing is opening up this box, opening up the articles and cutting from the article and pasting in here. Although you do have to be careful about eyeballing the optical character recognition that sometimes, you know, it won't recognize a character, it won't recognize a symbol. We got so good at this that we got this, okay, you fill all this stuff in, and then down at the bottom, you clip the PDF of the article onto here, and you tell it what issue this is going to, and then you hit submit, and bang, bang, off it goes. We got this down that it was taking us 6 minutes a piece to do this. So you multiply an issue where there's 10 articles times 6, that takes you an hour, versus spending 3 hours on that spreadsheet and then having the developer have to run the program to get it into XML and then have to load that. It was easier to do it with this great tool than it was to do the bulk ingest. And again, we'll leave you a recording of how that works. Next. Next. Okay, Claire's going to talk to you about DOIs.
Okay, everybody, let me,
Good for me to stop my share.
yeah. All right, so let me go ahead and get it up and ready to go. Okay. And, well, of course it's PowerPoint. Okay, everybody. All right, so I'm going to talk to you guys just a little bit about setting up the DOIs. All right, so let's go. All right, so DOIs are fairly simple. You're going to toggle the information in the plugins menu on the OJS site. Okay, but first let's talk about the two DOI services that OJS offers. So there's Metadata and OJS's native DOI plugin. So Metadata is a paid service that's offered by the Medical European something or other, and it's a paid service. So you would request to set up an account with their service. They will assign you a DOI prefix, and you will then work with them to set up a pattern. Both of so the Metadata will be configured in the import export. I'll do all of them. Don't worry about remembering this, but and the DOI plugin will be configured in the website settings. So they're different services, but generally they work the same way. Both of them will require you to set up a prefix for you with a DOI agency. Metadata will do this for you. The DOI plugin will require you to reach out there are a couple different services that will register a prefix for you. But in both, you will have to set up a suffix pattern, and that's going to depend on your journal and your needs. Sorry, guys. Okay, so here I am in the plugin menu of the website settings. So I'm just going to walk you through the native DOI plugin because I think that's the most simple one. So you'll scroll, sorry if I make you guys seasick. So they have the public identifier plugins, and here's the DOI. So you're going to go into settings, and this is where you can see how this works for you. So you can pick issues, articles, or galleys to have digital object identifiers. So I think we used Crossref, but I don't remember for sure. But you'll have to input the DOI prefix that has already been given to you. So you don't want to do this until you have your prefix. And then you're going to set up a pattern. So for this one, we set up ours is just articles. We use the journal initials, our year, and then, oh, where is A? And then A for article number. So depending on your journal, you can use any of these suffixes. Now, obviously, this creates some problems, right? You're not going to want to have a DOI pattern that uses the OJS galley ID if you aren't assigning discrete galley IDs. Another issue that we ran into, and many of you might, is if you are using page numbers to generate your DOIs, that's great, that's wonderful. Until you have an article where there are two articles on the same page, because a DOI has to be discrete for each item. So if you have two articles and you're just doing it based on the journal initials and the year and what page something is on, you're going to have two articles with the same DOI number, which obviously is going to make some issues. So again, this is a step that you want to do after you've looked at all of your metadata and you're very familiar with your journal, so you can see what pattern setting is going to be the best for you. Okay, and now we're going to move into a completely different section. And I'm going to pull it up. Okay. Sorry, I have to share different screens, and that's always incredibly stressful. All right, so we're going to talk about web design. This is probably I would say the icing on top of everything. So once you figured out your metadata and you've got all of that squared away, now you have to think about the way that your website comes across. Okay, so like every other part of this whole process, you need to know your journal. So first, you're going to want to identify your needs. Who is your audience? A journal for young adult fiction and critical studies thereof is going to look very different from a journal that's about cancer research. So you're going to want to think about what preconceptions your audience is going to bring to your journal and what your audience's needs will be. So for a scientific paper or journal, you might have several different things that you have to have in each article. And, so these are all of the higher level things you're going to need to think through. You also need to know your journal. So know what sort of things you're going to be messing with. So that's all metadata again. But primarily, design is communication. So what do you want to communicate? Your design should communicate what your journal is about, the level of research that you have put into all of this work, because like it or not, people judge books by their cover, and you want to make sure that you give your articles a pretty good cover. So people will judge based off of that. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a brief roadmap of what I'm going to talk about. So first, I'm going to discuss the themes in OJS. Then we can talk a little bit about color palette, and then fonts, and then the power and limitations of CSS, and finally, accessibility. Okay, so this is the default theme. So if you are just starting out, this is the theme you're going to have. This is how it looks. It's very compact. It's very straightforward. And there's not a whole lot to mess with. You can change the color, you can change the font, you can change some parts of the scheme, but the layout and everything else is going to remain basically the same. So think of the theme as a skeleton for the information you're trying to put across. Okay, and OJS Classic is another theme that they offer. So you can already see this one's a little bit more museum-like, that you have an image banner across. You can see they used a slightly different font, and it's formatted for scrolling. So let's see what we would see if we scroll down a little bit more. So we have the landing page, the announcements, and here we have the current issue information. So that's where we'll have our title, where we'd have our issue description. And this is what it looks like when you actually get into the thing. So you can see it's a very different and more like a newspaper style setting. And OJL Health Sciences is more modern, it's more sleek. You can see you have your navigation menu up at the top, you have an image banner, and it brings you right to the current issue. And these are the kind of things that they sound silly, but you can't really change them because we can't alter HTML. So as you can see, a lot more sleek, a lot more clean. You have your individual menu kind of boxes. And this is what the articles will look like. So yeah, it's a little colorful. There's a little bit more you can do with that. And here's the one that we ended up working with. Now, at first blush, it looks a lot like the default menu, but if you actually look at the code, there's a lot more that you can do with it and a lot more fun you can have. So you can see it has a title up at the top, but then it has that little menu section. So you have that little menu section here where you can see the different pages of the site and you have your current issue information. It's a little more informal, but to me, it looks more like a traditional journal publishing thing. All right, so here's the part I know you guys have all been waiting for, color theory. And I'm so sorry, I'm gonna have to quickly go over this because not everyone is super familiar with color theory. So first we're gonna talk about analogous colors. So that is these colors. They're the ones right next to each other on the color wheel. There's a lot of harmony in these colors, but not a lot of contrast. So think of your classic sunset image. It's very calming, it's very soothing, but there are really no pops of color. It's not very visually interesting, but it is very calming and harmonious. Right, so complementary colors are the ones exactly across from each other on the color wheel. This has the most amount of contrast, so there's a lot of movement in it. It's really bold and arrests your vision, but it can also strain vision and become kind of boring, honestly. So see this image here of the purple vase with the yellow flowers. It's very bold, it's very arresting, but it takes all of your focus onto the arrangement and you don't really see any of the other stuff. So there's also triadic, and those colors are equally spaced along the color wheel. And you can decrease the saturation of this to kind of tone it down. So there's, again, more of, here, let me just show you some examples. So that's very bold, it's very arresting. You see the orange and the green and the purple. But that can be really visually busy. So you can decrease the saturation of some of them, like this image, and kind of tone it down and make it a little bit more harmonious because there's a little bit of conflict between these colors. All right, and this one is always fun. Split complementary. That's harmony with contrast. So you take the complementary colors and you just go one color on either side. So this is a really fun one, but it can be really visually busy. The best example I could find for you guys was this picture of a bird. You see the yellow, you see the blue, and you see the maroon. But the main thing is, if the yellow was the one taking up the majority of the image, it would be really jarring. So you have to kind of balance it. And let's just say color theory isn't the most intuitive for all of us. So here we come to color palette. Now, there are lots of color palette makers out there, and that kind of takes a lot of the weight of figuring out what colors you want off of you. So up in your right-hand corner, you'll see the image picker tool from Coolers. There you can take a picture that you like and you think the colors look really neat, and you can pick the colors you like and it will automatically make a palette for you. And if you're more of a visual learner, and you need a little more guidance. Visme has compiled 50 different color schemes from already very successful websites, and they have a demonstration of that. So I picked the one for this from Panera Bread. So you can see it's very similar to the analogous, with the earthy tones, but with the blue thrown in for contrast. So this is just something that's a very easy customization that you can do. Okay, now let's talk fonts. I know you guys have been waiting for this, but it's the best. So what's a serif font? A serif font is a font basically with flourishes on the edges. So do you see at the end of this R and the C, you have the little extra lines? It's very classic. It's used in newspaper print a lot. And you can never go wrong with this. A sans serif is very clean. Do you see how there aren't any flourishes on the end of your letters? So this is like, if you're thinking Apple Macintosh, this is the font that they'll use. It's very crisp, it's very modern, it's very clean, but it can be very stark. Okay, and then display is going to be bold. That's where you're going to get like this font. This is your attention getter. So our recommendation, just in general and generally in design, is don't use more than 2 or 3 or at most 4 fonts. So one display font for, I would say, for your journal name, and then you can mix serif and sans serif in the lower levels of your page. Okay. And how do we do all of this, you ask? Well, through CSS. CSS is a complementary programming language that basically allows you to customize the style of your HTML. So it's a good way to make sure that you have consistency throughout all of your pages on your journal. So I could go into a long lecture about CSS and show you a demo, but we are running out of time and it would probably scramble the rest of your brains because it's a lot. Basically, it allows you to change font, colors, and placement of things, and even add background images to your site. And it will make your site look a little bit more professional and a little bit more intentional. So I have linked some resources for you. Code Academy has some great lessons, and CSS Zen Garden demonstrates just how much you can do with CSS. But unfortunately, like all things, there are limits. You can't change the HTML code of your site. And you also can't write scripts. So you can't create animation or any sort of fading between things. And also, it's very powerful. So any changes that you make to your site will be visible to patrons immediately. So remember when I said earlier, much earlier, hours ago, about that testing site that the OJS PKT classes would give you? This is a really good use of that. So you can test out your CSS theme before people will see it and see your kind of glitchy first attempts. Or you can change the visibility of your site before you start messing with this. CSS can also make your site run more slowly. So if you have 15 different fonts, it needs to load that with every page. So it's going to be a lot slower. And any changes that you make can alter the accessibility of the default themes. Luckily, most web browsers now will show you an alert if you're in developer mode and messing around with it, if you have too little contrast or have messed too much with accessibility settings. So what is accessibility? Oh, okay, so this is a goat. Color blindness is a huge, huge problem. If you have a site where most of the differentiation between things is done in color, if you have a colorblind patron, they're not going to be able to see that. So to design around that, make sure you use high contrast, design with minimalism in mind. So don't have too many colors going on, so someone will need to parse a lot of things. Add some texture to your site, and you can use images or symbols to further differentiate other than color. You can have some text be bold in addition to being green. Also, having a limited color palette helps. And honestly, most web browsers now have the ability to view a site as if you were colorblind. So you can kind of preview stuff before you push it forward to your patrons. Okay, so visual impairment. There are many people that will only encounter your website through a screen reader. So you always want to accompany any images that you make with text. And you want to make your site as screen reader friendly as possible. So that means code in a way that's very screen reader friendly. Don't add a whole lot of stuff that someone's screen reader is going to have to parse out. And especially if you're using symbols and stuff, make sure you do it in a very clean and straightforward fashion. So someone's screen reader isn't going dash, 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 cows, you know. Okay, and dyslexia is another common accessibility issue people can have. So in general, dyslexia causes you to kind of scramble the letters within a word. In general, sans serif will cut down on some of the confusion. And there are lots of dyslexic-friendly fonts out there that you can download and use on your site. Another common issue is spacing. So you always want to leave enough spacing in between words and in between letters that someone can, if they're taking their time, kind of read through it. And spacing between paragraphs also helps. So basically try to make things as open. And if you think about breathing, if you may have like leave space for breathing between words. Okay, are there any questions for me about design? Even if you want me to go over another previous section in more depth, anything like that.
I'm not seeing anything in chat, QA, or Zoom chat.
All right, cool.
Yes, and we do have about 2 minutes left in our session today.
All right, well, I guess I can demonstrate CSS programming after all. All right, so first, I'm just kidding, guys. I'm not going to do that to you. It's okay.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I would like to encourage everyone here to join us for upcoming TCDL sessions, and please take a look at our poster presenters. I'm going to paste a few in the Whova chat, some links to our posters. We do not have our traditional poster session, and sorry, I'm trying to talk and type at the same time. We don't have our typical happy hour and poster sessions. So please do take a look. All of our poster presenters recorded. Oh, that didn't work the way I wanted it to. I'm sorry. But the posters are in Whova, so you should be able to go find them in Whova. Over to the left on the menu, there are posters, and these are the titles of the posters that are similar in theme or topic to this wonderful presentation that you all had for us today. I would also like to encourage everyone to participate in our poster scavenger hunt. There is a quiz online. So in the past at TCDL, we've had a happy hour and poster session and a scavenger hunt with prizes. We have some excellent prizes. So take a look at the posters and please participate. I'm unfortunately not able to participate and win the awesome prizes, but I want to thank Lisa, Claire, and Eric again. Lisa and Claire did a kind of shortened version of this for our TDL OJS group a few months ago, and I learned so much more today. So I just want to thank you all so much for the amazing work that you've done with OJS and for the presentation that you gave us all here today.
Well, thank you very much for having us.
Awesome, thank you. I am now going to, if I can find where to do it, I'm going to stop the recording.